I want to welcome everyone here today. I'm Congressman Darrell Issa, and this is a listening session. So I'm going to speak for maybe 3 or 4 minutes and give you a short update on at least some of the things I've been working on, and then take your questions or comments. And I do learn from both questions and comments. I usually learn on the questions to be more careful on my answers. On the comments, I learn to go like this because I do need to hear from my constituents. One of the things I want to make you acutely aware of is for my first 2 years back in Congress, it was COVID, so I didn't travel too much outside the country. I did a number of trips around the country, mostly in the West, mostly on water issues. But this year so far, I've been to 8 foreign countries. And it's only March. And the reason is we're playing catch up, but the other reason is these are places that things are happening. In the previous 3 weeks, I've been in Saudi Arabia, Poland, Germany at the security conference in Munich, and then into Ukraine to visit both with Zelensky and with his military leaders and go to the scene of the war crimes and the murders in the southern area of Bucha. So all of that was the last trip. The trip before that was to the World Economic Forum to meet with leaders, mostly government leaders, but some business leaders, and then on to Taiwan, Mongolia, and South Korea. Now, what do they all have in common? Well, they're all areas where your dollars, or at least your military aid, is essential to keeping a balance. It's also an area that at any time could put our men and women in harm's way again. Our goal right now in each of those areas is to have those people be able to take care of their country with our technical assistance, usually in the case of South Korea, Taiwan, where we don't give them a penny. They buy the munitions and the capability that we sell them, but by giving them the technology, they're able to stave off North Korea, and of course Taiwan has China at its steps. That's the foreign affairs part of what you pay me to do, and I've been honored to do it for a lot of years. Domestically, I'm happy to take your questions and answer them on what's happening in the banking world. You may have heard that it's been an exciting time. I know that there's a lot of angst on what happened, what could happen, and why it happened. There's also the fact that in the 2 years that I was off in the administration, and then in the 2 years I've been back, we've continued to throw an awful lot of money into the economy that have led to inflation and, having a real discussion about how we're going to keep our jobs and our prosperity, but break the back of inflation certainly is something that occupies virtually every day. And then I'll close with this. My meetings at home, all of those subjects are important. Some people ask follow-up questions. Most people want to know when we're going to have water and roads that function, and what the future is. So don't feel bad if your questions are completely unrelated to those opening remarks. But I think it's important that people know I get up every morning wanting to serve and excited about the job, but I also get up every morning realizing that 90% of my job is not what your mayor does here. It's not what your city council does. It's not what the county supervisors do. It's the items that they can't do, which are the global items and the national items, and that's why you have a representative in Washington. So with that, Mayor, I'm going to ask you to pick on our constituents. That way, if you offend someone, I don't lose a vote. But if you choose, it'll probably be better.
Okay, let's see. How about Virginia?
Okay.
See how much better it is already?
And make sure that you, even though you've probably met the congressman before, say who you are and what you do.
Okay. I'm Virginia Hall. I'm on the Grossmont Healthcare District Board, and I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see that Okay. About fighting the fentanyl epidemic. I really appreciate that as number one, because that's, I think, causing a lot of our homelessness and a lot of issues in our country. The one thing that concerned me that I recently saw on the news was the cartel is making roadways into our country. Where I saw it on the news, it looks like it's throughout our country. And I just wondered, what is the Congress doing in regards to that?
Well, thank you. One of the things that I've been doing for my entire time back in Congress is leading trips to the border. And about 4 weeks ago, after my trip to Taiwan and before my trip to Ukraine, I brought Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa and a group of 5 other members of the House and Senate, and brought them down to the San Diego-Tijuana border. Had them do not just a tour of the border, but had them look at what I call the fentanyl locker. Over 100,000 pounds of drugs, disproportionately now fentanyl. Enough fentanyl in there to kill not just everyone in San Diego, but everyone in California. They got a really good briefing on the deceptive drugs, on the fact that pills are being sold as any number of drugs, but never as fentanyl. So you get 2 milligrams or more of fentanyl inside a tablet. If you're a long-time user, you take that pill, you're going to get what you get out of fentanyl. If you're a first-time user, it can be a death sentence. And 108,000 people died last year, and a great many of them were overdoses from literally their first use. That includes a number of West Point Academy students that were down on spring break in Florida and died. They didn't think they were taking fentanyl, and they didn't survive to find out. From the border trip, Senator Ernst and the rest of the delegation, we went down to Mexico City. We met with not just the criminal leaders down there, but with the head of their Army and their Navy. Unlike our service, they don't have a Department of Defense. They have a Navy that does everything Navy, and they do have an Army that doesn't just do Army, but they oversee the federales, they oversee the ports. It's much more what we would call Homeland Security. We looked at what they needed, and we looked at the challenges they were facing. And you're exactly right, Virginia. They are swamped. And if we don't find ways to help Mexico succeed in fighting the cartels, then the cartels will take over Mexico. They are, in fact, with the literally hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, they are taking over more and more operations in the United States. And so Congress has a lot of things it can do. One is expanding our support for the effort that the Mexican government is up to. And, anyone who's familiar with Mexico knows that Mexico doesn't want our troops. Mexico doesn't want, they remember Texas, okay, to be honest. And so they're very sensitive, and we're not giving back Texas, just so you know, or California. But we can provide them a lot of aid. We are doing some. We can do a lot more. But the other part of it, quite candidly, is we have to do our part on this side of the border. And I'm going to tell you about a project that only happened because one of our judges here in San Diego blew the whistle. The U.S. attorneys, both here and in Arizona, are no longer pleading people who traffic in fentanyl as traffickers for purposes of sentencing. They're calling them minor offenders. Now, a minor offender, in other words, someone found with fentanyl on them or in their vehicle, is supposed to be you're with your husband and he's trafficking, or it's in the car and you really didn't know what was going on. Minor is supposed to be connected but not part of the project. The U.S. attorneys are pleading that again and again to the judges, and some of the judges are furious, and they wanted us to expose it. I brought it up to the Chief Justice this morning. I had a conference call at 6:30 this morning, in which the Chief Justice and a representative of every single district in the country, and I had already done my homework after I got the call. to remind the judges that they have the authority to push back on the U.S. attorney and say that's an inappropriate sentencing guideline. So one of the challenges that we're facing is this administration says they're serious about fentanyl. We need to make sure that they are serious, but we may need to make sure they're serious in sentencing, that when somebody's bringing drugs over and they know there's drugs in the vehicle, that should be enough for them to be dealt with as serious criminals. I understand everyone has sympathy for everybody, but at the end of the day, if we don't stop the traffickers, they're the people we can get to. And the only way we should give them a pass on long sentences is if they actually help us upstream or downstream in fighting it. Lastly, and I know I'm taking a lot of time, we are going to have something much more like what Nancy Reagan had with the Just Say No. We're going to have a national program to bring real awareness to the fact that this is a new and different drug. It is much more addictive. It is so addictive that we have homeless people who the sheriffs use Narcan on and bring back to life. And later the same day, they do it again. They're so addicted that even though they were dead and had to be brought back, they'll do it again in the same day. That has to be a wake-up call, and the effects have to be. And I know that some of the television stations have done something, but we really do need to have a national effort for people to be aware of it, and particularly when you're looking at pills disguised as every other type of drug, but actually turning out to be fentanyl. Mayor?
Dino?
Hello, sir. My name is Dean Velasco. I wanted to talk about the illegal immigrants and the massive amount that are coming in here. And we all know that this is going to cause a very long-term effect on our social systems. With this current administration, how do you see that being at least slowed down? Because, I mean, it's just so many folks that are coming over and knowing, and I just happened to pay taxes yesterday, but just seeing all of our social systems and so many people using social systems that are in place for our citizens.
You had until March 15th on your subchapter.
That's what my friend told me, John Dadian, the great John Dadian said something.
Dadian said, pay it 2 days later, save the money.
Yes. Yes, yeah. He did. Actually, that's exactly what he said. It's funny that you know him that well. So my question is, so many people using these systems that aren't contributing to it. And I know I spoke with you a couple years back when you were running, and you had some great ideas about immigration, but that was before we just had the doors open and thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of folks are coming across. How do we stop the immediate problem, and then how do you see us doing this in the long term? I mean, this is going to affect my kids' kids, and they're going to be paying for, I mean, unless somebody pays into the system, if it's just us paying into the system, the system's going to, it's just not going to work. So I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
Sometimes I have to say there are problems we don't solve, but there are problems we manage. In the 4 years before this administration came in, I think we were managing it better. Not solving it, but at least improving and reducing. Clearly, this last 2 years, the floodgates have been opened, and there's little we can do on the people that have been let in. They will be here until adjudicated. The backlog is long, and some of them will stay because their story was properly said, not because they're really entitled. And I'll tell you a little story that made me aware of this. And stories are dangerous to tell, but I'm going to give you this one. Every week I come back here, and every week I go back through Dulles, and I get in my car at Dulles Airport, and I start driving. And when I go through the checkpoint, there's a number of people that are there every week that I pay my ticket and get out. And several of them are refugees from India. And they are religious refugees who came in and got exactly the kind of parole that years ago that these individuals are getting. Now, that's an interesting story. It doesn't mean much until you realize that each one of them over the years, when they see that I'm a congressman and we have an ID process there, the first thing they ask is, can't you change the law so I can go back and visit my family? And I'm looking and saying, we gave you the ability to leave where you were because it was hostile and dangerous, and you're here because of fear for your life. But the first thing you want to do is be able to have this use allow you to go back and visit with your family because it's not too dangerous for you to go back. You see the logic there of course, they've said the right thing to get here, and now that they're here and they're living the American dream, they also would like to go back and visit their family. I can be sympathetic to what they're asking, but I also makes me well aware that people who want to live the American dream will say whatever they need to say. And now we have about 2 million people who have said the right thing to be released into our country. We've got to change, and it's going to be hard with this president, but we've got to change the standard on which people are paroled into this country. And that doesn't mean we're going to get a Trump-like return, but it does mean that we need to get adherence to it. And just so you know, the actual law is that refugees of this sort claiming asylum are supposed to claim asylum in the first country they come to when they leave their country. So if you're coming from Romania, okay, and landing in Mexico on a flight in Mexico City or Monterrey or wherever, and then getting a connecting flight to because there are no nonstops directly to Tijuana. You go into Tijuana, you've already landed at least in one other country, and now you're coming to our border asking for it. You've already done something where we should be able to turn you back and say, no, let the Mexicans, if they let you in the country, let them. Claiming your asylum, you knew you wanted asylum, are you not safe? We need to do that. And that is international law. That is what we should be complying with. I'm going to give you one more, and that is the 2 million or so that are here. We need to change the rules so that they're clearly not on social welfare, so that they are pushed into, if they're able-bodied, pushed into jobs, including agriculture and other areas where we have shortages, and at least until they're adjudicated, make sure that they're productive in our society. And right now, we're not doing that. Many of these people are not working, and they're on public assistance. Many of them are working under the table and getting public assistance. Now, I've been told that that's not part of the parole, but that's the reality that the systems in every state they're going to do not stop them from it. So your question is one that I didn't give you an answer that I'm satisfied with, but I gave you the best one that we have, considering the Senate and the president are not going to easily go along with what we want.
All right, more questions? Come on, I know somebody has. Mr. Dadian.
So I'm going to follow the mayor's suggestion and tell you who I am. John Dadian, a very proud Santee resident. I'm a very proud constituent. A very brief comment and then a...
You know, I ran for this district just so I could represent you, John.
You're a good man, Congressman. Brief comment and then a direct question on the issue. Comment I want to make, and it follows up to what you said, that we've got a mayor, we've got a council, you're in Washington. That's the way it should be. But I want to make a comment that your staff, I'm very involved with the East County Chamber Government Relations Committee, and they attend regularly and they brief us. I can't tell you how much that's appreciated, and that really makes us feel we got a connection to you. So I'd like to applaud your staff. Thank you very much.
Well, John, just turn around and say hi to my district director. He's
hi,
sitting
guys.
there. Yeah, I've never seen him glow so happily as that comment.
This gentleman does a great job, and Mike, you're awesome also. Congressman, in your opening comments, an issue that you're taking the lead on that you didn't mention is the famous mileage tax. And I don't want this to sound cynical, but with what you're doing with your proposal, realistically, will that have an influence on, because they're talking about going through the state of California, et cetera. Supposedly it's off Sandag now, but the state is still pushing it. Thank you.
John, it's a very good point. The whole idea of a mileage tax, the state has a legitimate right to have a mileage tax. They don't have a right to track your private travel. Your non-commercial travel is outside the bounds, and the Fourth Amendment protects you from that, or at least it should. So my bill in Washington, which I think we're going to get strong bipartisan support, makes it clear that Big Brother tracking you is simply out of bounds. If they want to have your Tesla show up once a year and where everyone else is getting a smog check, check your mileage and somehow have a bill. There's some sensibility that those vehicles are not paying highway taxes in any other way. But the idea that people who are already paying 50-some cents a gallon plus the federal, and then paying the state plus the federal, about $1 a gallon basically in tax, are going to get up to another $1.60 in new tax on the based on this mileage, is pretty reprehensible, because it's a big power grab at a time when, quite frankly, they're doing a very bad job of building roads. And they're not suggesting that money build roads. They're suggesting that it get us from about 3% to maybe 7% who take public transportation. None of them live in Alpine. Few of them live in Santee, because if they've been here, they know that, the train is not going to get to your ranch. It's not going to get to your residential area. It's not going to service you. Some of that is the county's decision, some of it's Sandag's decision, but the decision on whether or not I stand up for the Constitution and your right not to be tracked, your right not to have Big Brother not wanting to, but knowing everywhere you are, what time you're there, when you came and when you left, that's absurd. And yet that's what they're proposing. And just so you understand, if they get that, we all know that they're then going to have, there's the right social need. So if you're carpooling to the right place, we'll charge you less. If you're doing that optional trip to church on Sunday, maybe we'll charge you more. Okay, and if you're going during a peak hour somewhere that we don't want you to go, we're definitely going to charge you more. That kind of shenanigans are well within the way Sandag's treating it. And the worst part is, none of it's going to get used to take care of the congestion on the 67 or the 78 or the 76 or or the 15, all of which desperately need to have these highway dollars spent and spent well. So we think we can do our part because we think the Constitution's behind us. I will say that I'm also supporting the idea that the cities other than San Diego should split off into their own equivalent of Sandag. It only takes $200,000 to be a separate entity as Sandag is. There's no question at all that any number of suburbs would be better served if they were representing their people, because they'd be representing the values there rather than one man's downtown idea of the perfect train to wherever I guess nowhere. And I'll tell you, when I represented the coastal district and I had, the Amtrak and all of the other trains that go down the coast, I was acutely aware of how often they're empty. They don't even have good ridership in the areas where they say the system works. You can't make up the stuff that happens in real life, can you? Look, I'm a big supporter of the cross-border economic system, and I've been supportive since I was on the chamber and the EDC board. But there also is the recognition that we need to get our partners to the south to do their job. The Imperial Beach is a disaster for almost 12 months out of the year, every year now. Our Navy SEALs are swimming in stuff that give them infections because the Tijuana River is getting worse every day. And Mexico, and it was a big part of when we went down to Mexico, we were discussing, is they have to do their part of the job. So if they want to expand rail, I'm all for it. But I'm not going to let U.S. dollars be paid once again for south of the border unless they do their part, and that starts with the Tijuana River.
Darrell, I just want to follow up on the...
Are you calling on yourself, Mayor?
I am calling on myself.
Well, then get a mic.
I won't use this one.
Well, it's your mic. You paid for it.
Okay, here's the thing about this idea of creating a different metropolitan planning organization. And I think it's important what you're talking about, because most people don't know the reason why we have one is because federal law requires us to have one all across the country, in every state, and every county, in every region. Now, what that looks like is different. As a matter of fact, we have that because there's 2 federal laws that require us to have SANDAG, basically. And so what happens, though, is most states, most areas, they only have the responsibility for planning their roadways, some transit. And in San Diego, we're very different because over the years, state legislation has added to our burden, which makes us responsible for regional housing, which most of the time we don't think they understand that local need for regional housing versus not having a need for it. And so something that we could think about is maybe federal legislation can say that though all those extra things cannot be commingled. If you're going to do transportation and transit, that's what you do, transportation and transit. And then you have a separate entity that handles all those other issues. And that could be another association of governments, of whatever that looks like. But the idea of having a separate MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, is not a bad idea when you figure that all the unincorporated area of San Diego County is about 512,000 people. And that is probably one of the most underrepresented. At least in Santee, we represent 60,000 people, and I have a voice. I can go there and I can shout as loud as I need to. But, you know, the County Board of Supervisors prohibits their, or, well, I won't say prohibits. That's kind of a harsh word, but doesn't allow their representative for the unincorporated county to go and represent them. So maybe that's an idea, is having a separation of all the extra stuff in transportation for the planning of our freeways and other highways.
John, I knew there was a reason you were mayor. I've written that down. It's we will take a look at where we can help federally. I mean, and so everyone understands, we know we're up against a state legislature that is not sympathetic, SANDAG majority that's not sympathetic, but we've already pushed them back on the mileage tax. They've now deferred for a while, said it's not immediate. I think what it boiled down to is they wanted to cool the pressure they were getting by people being outraged. And, you know, how many people drive a car that gets 30 or 40 miles per gallon? Okay. You're the disproportionate tax. You've done all the right things to get good mileage. And at 4 cents a mile, you know, it's $1.20 a gallon if you get 30 miles per gallon. And, you know, people don't even think about, if we were suggesting $1.20 in new tax per gallon, people would be outraged. But that's what they're actually doing. But they're calling it a mileage tax. And by the way, since you'll be stuck in traffic, you won't get that good a mileage, so you'll be burning even more gas.
Up here.
Hi, good afternoon now. Dr. Baranski, Superintendent of Santee School District, and we serve 6,400 children in this fine town as well as El Cajon. Just to draw a little bit of attention as well to federal law in terms of IDA and special education services for students. We've seen about a 5% increase of students who are required to have services over this last 5 years, and a disproportionate amount of funding obviously coming in. So just to draw attention, that's not unique to Santee. But we spend about $22 million a year on special education services and only receive $1.5 million in reimbursement from the federal government.
Yeah, you know, and here's a piece of history. You know, in the 23 years since I came, when I first got there, I didn't know what IDEA was. I hadn't been in government, and so I got hit almost immediately with this. And I remember going to, her name was Paige Anderson, was my first legislative director, and I said, "Tell me about this." And she came back with a stack like this of paper, and this was when you couldn't have your phone read it to you, so you had to read it yourself. And I read through this whole history of what started off as well-intended federal assistance, and then President Jimmy Carter promising that we, the federal government, would pay 100%. Now, that was a pledge by a president. It wasn't an act of Congress, so it doesn't have the same meaning. But since that pledge, we have increased, adjusted for inflation. Okay, so it's not just the dollars, but it's the actual equivalent dollars, more than fivefold the amount of money coming from the federal government. But with the Americans with Disability Act, with the growth of autism and similar challenges, the amount and the expense of children and even young adults being educated has grown more than 3 times that, 5 times. So you have my sympathy. I don't know how we solve it other than one of the things we have to do is we have to get to some of the root causes. We have to put real money into dealing with autism and dealing with how do we better work with these special needs children. A couple days ago, I visited one of these spelling centers where previously unable to communicate young children and adults are learning to spell. And it turns out their brains were capable, their mouth wasn't. And as a result, some of these people are going to be a positive part of the workforce. So I don't have an answer that's purely enough money to meet Jimmy Carter's commitment, and I haven't for more than 22 years. But what I do see is that we have to both fund what we can to help you, because sometimes it's a small district with a very big responsibility because there are magnet areas where they get more than their share. But it's never enough anywhere, except Washington, D.C. The federal government funds 100% there. It's a very strange anomaly. But we also have to work on some of those backside ones that hopefully would help reduce your cost of doing it. But thank you for what you do, because these special needs children only become productive adults with the kind of effort that you provide. So I'm going to thank you, even though you noticed I didn't quite get to where I have an answer to help you other than a little bit. Yes?
Councilman Trotter.
You know, it's a good thing about giving out the mic. You get to take it back.
Yeah. So, Santee Councilman Dustin Trotter. I wanted to thank you, actually, on behalf of myself, the colleagues, and our city for the $2.5 million you got approved for the Highway 52 improvements that we need to get done. What? Yeah, it's a small chunk, but it's something. It's the improvements that you mentioned that we need to do. And federally, obviously, getting that money does help us regionally here. So I want to thank you.
Well, thank you. It's one of our challenges, and you asked where the rest of it is. Getting the match from cities is usually not hard. Getting the match from the state is like pulling teeth. It's amazing, as they were giving out money with this huge surplus last year, we still could not get them to meet their needs, meet their requirements in Medicaid, what we call Medi-Cal, and in highway construction and other infrastructure. We will continue to work hard to make sure, especially for our most impacted roads, we get these set-asides. I, like my predecessor, Duncan Hunter, have been supportive that members of Congress should use these directives, some call them earmarks, to listen to your constituents, find the areas that they say they need, verify that these are the most needed, and move the dollars that way. Nobody in Washington or Sacramento is going to do a better job than you will in telling me where your needs are, and that my staff can verify so that when we put a request in, whether it's an interconnecting water line or it's a highway project, we know that it's there and that it will be used. And I think it's that combination of knowing that we don't put money out there that won't be used. And yes, we'll be looking for an add-on earmark this year because we know that this was only a down payment on a fairly substantial cost.
Again, I appreciate you taking up that cause, because we need that money out here too. Just like a lot of people need it, but it's a big deal for our transportation.
Well, and I'm very fortunate. Not only did we take the majority, but one of the things about returning to Congress after 2 years of being in the administration was that they still treat me better than they did before I left, but they still give me my seniority. So they're always saying, and the senior member. Now, I'm not sure that's a compliment, so be careful when they call you a senior member. But it is working, and now that we're in the majority, Congressman Calvert on appropriations, a number of my other colleagues and friends we think we're going to get at least as much as we did for various projects in the district. And remember that when you've got an urban district, it's easy to say, well, we've got this urban decay and so on. But the projects actually are denser and less. We're so spread out that, you know, when we need a water line connection, it's miles and miles of water line. When we need to run fiber for broadband, you know, it's 20, 30 miles, not 20 or 30 feet. And so we remind people that it's actually more expensive to do the infrastructure in this large district. I represent 3/4 of the county, even though I represent only one of 5 districts. But Santee is the heart of the county, the heart of the district.
Councilmember Laura Cobalt, Vice Mayor.
Hi. I do want to talk about Silicon, the bank, and the bank failure on Friday. It certainly was conversation at our dinner Friday. And the fact that they're going to insure over the $250,000, yet they claim it's not going to cost the taxpayers any money. Can you explain that for us?
Well, yes, I can. It will not cost a taxpayer money directly, is what they should have said. What it's going to do is it's going to cost your bankers money in a special assessment. The bankers will then have to, they're not going to absorb it, they'll have to pass it on. And so when you have an account at your business or personally at banks, every federally insured bank will be taking a hit. And that'll be very large banks and very small banks. I've been on 3 long conference calls, 2 of them, one of them bicameral with the House and the Senate and the administration, one of them just the House, and then one just Republicans led by Speaker McCarthy. That's 3 hours I'll never get back. Thank you. Yeah. The interesting thing is there's a little bit of double talk, and there's a little bit of truth. And I'm going to try to be kind to the administration. I'll start with, look, the administration is executing a very good bailout / parachute out of a plane that collided because they didn't do their job. The midair collision of Silicon Valley Bank is because the San Francisco-based regulator and the Sacramento-based, both of the regulators didn't do their job. And they allowed this bank to over-leverage with long-term against short-term, and it destroyed them. And they can say that it was because of rising interest rates, but if a year ago they'd said, hey, you've got to change your ratios, this is not going to be acceptable, because the Fed had already announced that they were going to 5%, but they only went up by 0.75% the first time. Those bonds went down very little compared to where they are today. They sat on the bonds as they became less and less valuable and put them in a position that caused the disaster. So I'm not blaming a party, but I am blaming the regulators. What's interesting is they're doing 2 things in this bailout. One, they're saying there's a systemic risk, and I haven't heard that since the TARP bailout under President Bush and Obama together, where we spent $1 trillion of taxpayer money. The systemic risk is if we don't do something that we don't have to do, that we are not supposed to do, if we don't do that, then it could spread. And if it spreads, it's going to be bad for everyone. And that's the justification for why they're making people with tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, actually even billions of dollars, whole when they were only guaranteed for $250,000 and whatever happened to be left when the bank was liquidated. So they're going to be made completely whole. They're justifying it in a way that, to me, says these guys got lucky, but when your bank goes out of business, you may not be lucky because they may not make that exception because you're not going to be systemic. And that's the problem, is that they've already said it's a one-time deal. Well, if it's a one-time deal, then somebody got lucky and somebody else will probably get unlucky in the next bank failure, the next bank failure. But they're doing something else you should be more worried about. They have this special ability at the Fed now, and I think the Fed chairman is wrong. These bonds that Silicon Valley Bank were holding, these are Treasury bills. These are very, very safe instruments. But if you get a treasury that, we'll just use $1,000. It's $1,000 and it pays 2%, and it's good for 10 years. If the interest rises as it has, that bond goes down in value because no one's going to pay when they can get a 4% as much for a 2. As a matter of fact, at full maturity, it may collapse it by almost half. Well, that's what's happened is these 10-year bonds are that were worth $1,000 a piece are now worth $900 or $800 a piece. The Fed has said, we will let you borrow, starting with this new day that starts today, I guess, we'll let you borrow the full $1,000. And it isn't even the full $1,000 less a deductible, it's the full $1,000. So now we're saying you're holding on to this bond that's worth $800, but we're going to let you borrow $1,000 because you're going to hold it to maturity. Well, that sounds okay, but here's what should concern all of us. If a bank has to sell that instrument once they've done this, they can't. How many of you ever saw the play or the movie The Producers? Okay, in that play, the guy sells 200% of his production. So if it makes money, he's got to pay out twice as much as it makes. So it's got to lose. So he produces a terrible device or a terrible play, and lo and behold, it's popular. So now it's going to make money, so he's going to go to jail. He's got to make it lose. Well, that's what's going to happen with these bonds. You can't sell them because if you sell the $1,000 bond that's worth $800 that you've borrowed $1,000 on, when you sell it for $800, you owe the Fed $800 plus $200, which means it doesn't give you any money. It costs you money to sell. So now you've got these documents in your vault that you can never liquidate. Well, those were supposed to be the liquid assets. Your other assets are your home mortgage, your building, industrial building, whatever it is. Those are also not liquid. So if there's a run after they do this, even a small one, many of these banks are going to be less able to survive because they'll have nothing they can liquidate at par. Or if they go to liquidate them, they're going to run. If you go to liquidate a bunch of home loans, you got to liquidate them to somebody who'll buy. And in a buyer-seller situation, very quickly you could end up like we did in 2008 with credit default swaps. So I don't approve of what they're doing. I understand they're trying to provide a parachute after a midair collision. I believe that, once again, they're taking a risk that a year from now, when those notes become due, we have to hope that a year from now interest rates are lower. Well, according to the Fed chairman, we can't anticipate the rates being lower in a year. As a matter of fact, currently they're going to be higher than they are today. John?
How are we doing on time?
Well, Ramona's my next most favorite place. We got a little time. Mike, do we have some time before we have to? Good. Okay, we've got time.
All right then. Let's see. James Lai.
Good morning. Hear me okay?
Good afternoon.
James Sly. I'm the president of the East County Economic Development Council. Obviously, my main priority, at least in this context, is the economics of our region and how we move towards establishing broadband infrastructure, employing, creating quality jobs, and sort of our leadership there. So if you could, I'd like to ask you what your vision is for how you see our economy developing and some of your priorities as you obviously move through your office. Thank you.
Well, and you said it very well. Broadband distribution is extremely important to suburban and rural America. And, one of the challenges is we haven't had a national plan for rural America. We're doing these periodic grants. I was just at Verona, and they're looking for a grant in addition to the money they're putting in to try to get fiber and broadband to all of their residents. And they have a pretty good plan, and they're kicking in a lot of money. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons they can make it work is they've already done the sunk cost that they needed to get it to the casino, and they're able to star it off from the casino. We don't have a similar plan. In other words, we haven't created in rural America places that are clear hubs. And it's one of the areas that AT&T and the other broadband providers need the most help is not for me to get the last few feet to your house, because quite frankly, some of that is your responsibility and whoever you're getting your delivery from, but making sure that we clear the right-of-ways and provide the funds to get that high-speed fiber, the big pipe, if you will, close enough that then it can be distributed out. And, I don't serve on the committee that specifically has to do that, Energy and Commerce. I did some years ago, but I work with Kathy McMorris Rogers, and that's one of the things that she has a subcommittee that specifically she formed this Congress to work on, is to promote rural broadband. So I think that's your most important. Obviously, a road that gets you to your house is good too. But what we saw from the pandemic is that it was much harder for some people in rural areas to be able to telework than it was for sort of your urban dweller, and that was a burden in some cases. It's also critical if we ever have to take our kids out of school again, which I hope we don't, but to make sure that they can continue getting educated. So I see it as something that's only going to be more of a priority, and one where the federal government has a role. So you understand and I'm just going to give you I was added to the Science Committee this Congress, and I'm in my 12th term, and then I'm the freshman on science. Fortunately, they put me at the top of the dais, sort of, again, for being senior. But the first thing I asked for was a briefing on all the companies that are competing on overhead broadband. Obviously, Bezos and Elon Musk and a number of them are doing it, and it's very promising. The fact is that we're probably going to get as much of our broadband from overhead as we're going to get from fiber, and I think that's going to be very, very important in the near future, that we recognize that there are a number of companies that have plans that are very viable. As a matter of fact, I was in Ukraine a few weeks ago, and right now, when my cell calls there on my burner phone, so the Russians couldn't hack my phone, all of my calls were actually on an Elon Musk system. It was on a system that was added when the Russians took out the Ukrainian system.
Darrell, when you say overhead, do you mean replacing the copper analog lines with a fiber cable, or are you talking about wireless?
We're talking about satellites, okay. Mostly low Earth orbit. The thing that Elon Musk has shown us, and so has Branson and others, is that for 50 years, America got taken to the cleaners by these companies that were making rockets for NASA. The cost of launching was so high that when you put a satellite up there, it did a great thing, but it cost so much that, in fact, it was very hard to get low-cost communication. It worked fine for certain things, but it really didn't work fine for the consumer. What Musk showed is that he lowered the cost of launch initially by 40%. He has now cut that in half. And for low Earth orbit type satellites, they're cutting it even more. And that really means that what used to cost $100 million is now costing like $8 million to put into space. And you can imagine how much more you can put in space at a tenth the cost. So we are now going to be doing so much more in communication because it's affordable. And as you make more of these kind of satellites, the satellites themselves become cheaper. So now the launch is a tenth the price, potentially, and the satellite can be a quarter or even a tenth the price. That's what's making the ability to have broadband from overhead. Now, overhead has other challenges, but it clearly for rural America, it gives you immediate broadband without having to wait for fiber that might be a mile from the nearest location if it's your property line.
So basically, for those who remember, that's the difference in the cost between beta and VHS?
John, you're showing your age. I have no idea what he's talking about.
So any other questions or comments? Well, it doesn't look like we have anything else. I'm going to
I didn't hear a water question the whole time. Nobody has a water problem or a natural gas cost problem?
Congressman, what's your position on water?
I'm for it. I will tell you this, and thank you for giving me a closing remark. We right now are in what we call flood drought. That's when we've got so much water we don't know what to do, and yet they're still telling us we're in a drought because they don't know where to store it, and they don't have a plan. California, with a lot of pushing from the federal government, needs to actually use the water we get in the north and use the water we get in the winter by saving it and storing it. And that's going to mean pushing hard against some environmental extremists to get the water into the ground or into reservoirs. And we can't continue to do things like the Poseidon facility in Carlsbad. The electricity that's using to change seawater into fresh water is prohibitive. So is it a great project? Absolutely. It gives us great water that no one can afford, and certainly water that no farmer can afford. So, I'm all for getting water wherever we need it, but I also want to get it from the lowest cost. And the lowest cost is the part that God gives us from above. So that's my water position. I will also say one thing. You should all be angry as hell about your natural gas bill and the governor trying to take away natural gas. Your bill was based on the fact that we import natural gas through a 36-inch pipe. We have one pipe, and when that pipe was down, the price went through the roof. I'm not mad at Sempra, but I am mad at the system that put us in that exposure. But I'm also mad at the fact that I've been out to Bakersfield. I've been to a number of places around the state. We have the ability to produce our own natural gas, and it would be local and cheaper. And we're not doing it because we have a group in Sacramento who literally tell us that we're going to have to get rid of our stoves. And yes, I have a bill that on a national basis would prohibit that prohibition, if you will. And I'm doing it for a very simple reason. We can't make enough electricity without natural gas today. And the worst thing that would happen is for your home heating to have to become all electric exactly when there's no electricity on a cold night, when the sun didn't shine much and it's dark and the wind isn't blowing and you're sitting there shivering. I remember Jimmy Carter telling us to put a sweater on. I own sweaters. You'll notice I'm not wearing one. So, Mayor, would you have me back again after this performance?
I'd have you back again, but, two ways that things we might help. Water, storage, and homelessness, people out of work, bring back the Project Works that we had in the 40s and 50s, and put those people to work building a new dam.
Well, first you'd have to get that permit. And it is a dam permit. You know that. And you have to go get the dam guys for the dam permit. And it's damn hard to get the dam permit from those dam guys. Did I get all the dams right?
Well,
once again,
with that, thank you very much. We'll
thank
be
you, Mayor.
More than happy to have you back again.
Thank you. Except for the shy ones.